Hello everyone! Today is another video because as I promised, today will be a double upload due to me missing yesterday for personal reasons. So, we have another list type video, not a top 10 per se, but more of a direct guide, if you will. So these are the most threatening Pokemon on each type. I actually made a list talking about all these different Pokemon, and without further ado, I will go in depth a little bit into why each of them are as dangerous as they are. So, without further ado, let's go to Bug. So, the most dangerous Pokemon on Bug is, without a doubt, Volcarona. Volcarona is definitely one of the biggest threats Bug has to offer. Now, you might think Scizor is also really one of the biggest threats because it solos like 3 types on its own, but Volcarona can also do that. Because while it may not have super effective stab on all those types, it can literally sweep weakened teams really easily, similar to Scizor almost. Because without really strong priority or really any sort of consistent way to beat it out on its physical side, Volcarona can just absolutely demolish your team if you're not prepared. And because of this giant threat level, this is why it's always been OU for multiple generations. And it's also why it's always been really powerful in monotype. So on Bug, it's always been S rank, but on Fire, it hasn't always necessarily been the best Pokemon on Fire, mainly because other Fire types had more instantaneous power and didn't need to set up. But Volcarona still makes a name for itself and still sees usage on Fire because it's so dangerous and so potent. It was especially good during the Z-move era, but even without Z-moves, Volcarona is still a humongous threat that needs to be accounted for at all times. Flame Body, Quiver Dance, access to Fire Blast, Giga Drain, not really Hurricane so much, but just a lot of other special moves like Psychic and Bug Buzz helps it out a lot. Roost also makes it potentially a really obnoxious Pokemon to deal with, and Heavy Duty Boots allows Volcarona to actually work really effectively as a Pokemon, because now it doesn't have to worry about its Stealth Rock weakness, which arguably is one of the biggest buffs it has this gen. So take this as you will, but Volcarona is definitely the most dangerous Pokemon on Bug. And if you're planning on dealing with Bug, you have to figure out how to get around this Pokemon, because if you don't prepare for it, you will lose. Alright, next up we have Dark. And for Dark, it's a little bit more tough, but I feel like I wouldn't be lying if I said it was Urshifu. Urshifu, even during its debut, has been a humongous threat to almost every single team. Because of its Unseen Fist ability, it's a auto crit Wicked Blow, which is still incredibly strong despite being 80 base power. Its other contact moves also being unblockable, as I mentioned before, thanks to Unseen Fist, and it's just incredible how good this Pokemon is. With a Choice Band or a Choice Scarf, this thing can either be like a really fast offensive revenge killer pivot, or it can be a really fast hard hitting physical attacker with a Choice Band. Not necessarily a wall breaker, but it can be very powerful. And most walls really can't do anything about it because of its raw power. If you essentially don't have a resist to Dark, Urshifu is going to run over your team very easily. Unless you have a very physically bulky Pokemon that can take a Wicked Blow, or one of its coverage moves, which isn't exactly easy to come by. So usually what you'll have to do is revenge kill it. And revenge killing this thing is also not necessarily the hardest thing ever, but because it has good teammates, and good offensive teammates at that, it's very hard for Urshifu to not like completely wreck your team. And while it still is arguably one of the hardest monsters to deal with, it does have its weaknesses due to it being a fighting type and having those weaknesses attached to it, like Fairy, Flying, and Dark giving it a weakness to its own typing in fighting. And it has its weaknesses, but it's definitely still a super dangerous Pokemon that should always be accounted for, and it's definitely one of the most dangerous Pokemon Dark has to offer right now. So if you want to deal with Dark, you have to make sure you have something to deal with Urshifu. because it is a very, very big threat. Alright, next type we have is Dragon. For Dragon, I would say your most threatening Pokemon would have been Kyurem Black had it not been banned. But in this current generation and this current meta, I feel like the answer would definitely be a tie between Dragapult and Hydreigon. So these two Pokemon are obviously sort of similar, but sort of not similar in their role. So Dragapult on most Dragon teams serves as speed control with the Choice Scarf set and Infiltrator, essentially stopping substitute Slack sets from getting out of control, and also being great speed control to deal with a lot of Pokemon, such as weather mons like a Kingdra, for example. It can outspeed and KO that with Draco Meteor. It can also stop Excadrill as well, if it's adamant, I believe. It's also just really, really strong because of its 100 base special attack, which obviously isn't really the strongest, but Shadow Ball and Draco Meteor in particular is definitely no joke. Even coming off of a 100 base special attack, it still hits ridiculously hard, and you should be careful because this thing can just outspeed a lot of your Pokemon and just destroy a lot of things, and that's just one set. It can also run a Dragon Dance set, which can allow it to be even more dangerous, and just allow you to, and with Dragon Darts and Phantom Force, it can just become really, really annoying to deal with for the opposing team. And I definitely feel like Dragon Ball is definitely one of those Pokemon where you have to make sure you check at least one or both of its sets, or at least have a reasonable way to deal with any of its sets. Because being unprepared against Dragapult will definitely lead to you losing the Dragon matchup very hard. And the reason why I put Hydreigon in comparison to this fantastic Pokemon is because Hydreigon sort of shares some of the similarities. Dark Pulse is obviously very annoying. Draco Meteor is also really good. You also have its many other coverage moves, and the fact that it can use Taunt, it can use Roost, it can use a Stall Breaking set, it can use Substitute. It's still very dangerous in this generation, but clearly not as super dangerous as Dragapult, but I still feel like it was worth mentioning that both Hydreigon and Dragapult are some of the most obnoxious Pokemon you can deal with. Hydreigon is definitely more threatening in some certain matchups like Steel and Grass, because of its access to Fire Stab and ability to just knock out some of your key walls very fast and easy. And for those reasons, I believe Hydreigon and Dragapult are both worth mentioning as the biggest threats on Dark. Alright, next type we have is Electric, and I think it's really obvious what it is, but yes, Electric's biggest threat is definitely Raichu, Alola. I already talked about this in the previous video, but yeah, Rising Voltage, Electric Terrain. Yeah, it's kind of strong. It's very fast and very strong. It's very easy to check this thing. You just have to use a lot of priority, and a lot of types do have priority. Dark, Steel, Water. You also got yeah, Psychic to an extent has some sort of priority, even though you don't want to use it because it's Psychic Terrain. But yeah, Terrain also stops Raichu from being as dangerous. You also got Ghost having Mimikyu to deal with it. A lot of types do have priority to deal with this thing and force it out. And because Electric is more of an offensive type, it doesn't really necessarily have a ton of switch-ins for those strong priority moves. So, another good example is that both Fighting and Dark have access to Sucker Punch Urshifu, which offensively forces this thing out every single time, and Urshifu could just choose to run, use Wicked Blow at any time, and can knock out another one of your Pokemon because you obviously do not have a resist for Wicked Blow at all. But yeah, Raichu's definitely got flaws, but it's still ridiculously strong in its own right, and with no priority available, this thing can definitely be a huge threat to your team, and I definitely think it's the most dangerous Pokemon on Electric right now, because there's no way that you can prepare for an Electric team and not have some sort of way to deal with Raichu Alola. Otherwise, you are definitely forfeiting the match. But yeah, next up we have Fairy. Fairy is going to be relatively simple because the most threatening Pokemon in Fairy is Hatterene. Hatterene is definitely one of the most scary Pokemon on Fairy because of the reasons I mentioned in the most obnoxious Pokemon video before. Calm Mind plus Trick Room disrupts the flow of so many battles. Also, once it gets a few Calm Minds up, it can be really hard to stop, similar to Hydreigon and similar to other setup sweepers, except this one has access to Magic Bounce, which makes it hard to stop. It also makes it hard for you to phase it with a Whirlwind and such. So it's definitely very tough to deal with, and because of its inability to get taunted and phased, makes it really hard to take care of. You also can't Toxic it or wear it down with a lot of chip damage unless it's like Weather or something around those lines, or like Rocky Helmet and Iron Barbs from Draining Kiss. But yeah, this thing essentially just sticks around for a long time thanks to Draining Kiss, and Psychic just hits ridiculously hard because of its very, very high special attack stat. And it's for these reasons that I believe that Hatterene is definitely one of the biggest threats on Fairy, along with Klefki. Klefki is definitely one of the best support Pokemon, but on its own, it's not like a super threatening Pokemon. Like Klefki isn't one of the most threatening Pokemon on Fairy, but it's definitely one of the most potent and enables so many threats. Oh yeah, also Azumarill is definitely worth a mention here. Not having an Azumarill check or a way to deal with Azumarill is definitely forfeiting the match. But Hatterene and Azumarill are both like the most threatening Pokemon, because Azumarill, obviously, most of you already know, Belly Drum, Priority Aqua Jet, relatively fat-ish, access to huge power, and yeah, it's just really dangerous. And paired with Screen's Klefki and Hatterene, it's definitely one of the reasons why Fairy is decent right now. But yeah, those are the biggest threats on Fairy, I feel. Next up, we got Fighting. Fighting's biggest threat is definitely Urshifu, but I feel like depending on the type you're using, it can be many others. So Fire, obviously, it would be Terrakion. Ground and other types that are weak to Keldeo are weak to Keldeo. Bug and Grass are weak to Hawlucha. Like, there are so many different matchups, so many different types that hate certain mons on Fighting. Because each of these mons can just solo and really do a lot of work in one matchup, or a few matchups. But I feel like Urshifu is definitely the most consistent of them all, and is always constantly a threat because it's the most solid Pokemon out of all of them. So yeah, Urshifu, we already talked about why Urshifu is really potent on Dark, and most of the same things apply to Fighting. Banned Sucker Punch, banned Wicked Blow, except it's easier to deal with on Fighting because it's an offensive type, so if you switch out with Urshifu, you end up switching out into one of your offensive Pokemon, and that ends up killing them, most likely, because your main only switch-in is Cobalion and maybe the rare Virizion. So yeah, for those reasons, Urshifu is definitely the most threatening Pokemon, but Terrakion, Keldeo, and Hawlucha are all individually scary on their own right. Next up, we have Fire. So Fire is definitely going to be Cinderace. Cinderace with Libero, Pyroball, HJK, even Gunk Shot, Sucker Punch. This thing has a lot of moves, as well as Court Change, access to heavy duty boots. This thing is super scary, has a bunch of sets that it can run, not even including Court Change. You can also run Bulk Up to sweep, like solo sweep like a bunch of other types. Like, this thing can apparently solo Electric all on its own with a Bulk Up set, as long as you get one Bulk Up, which isn't particularly hard because Pokemon like Pincurchin exist that are super passive. You can just click Bulk Up, start clicking Pyroball against the entire type, and once Raichu comes out, you Sucker Punch it. It instantly dies, and then you proceed to keep clicking Pyroball until you run into either a Choice Scarfer or you just run out of PP for Pyroball or HJK. Point of the matter being that you just literally do so much damage to a lot of types that just don't have a resist to you. And Cinderace is definitely extremely dangerous because of this. So for those reasons, I believe Cinderace is definitely the most threatening Pokemon on Fire. It's a really strong physical attacker, really strong sets, and unpredictability makes it one of the hardest Pokemon to deal with. To deal with this Pokemon, you need a good Revenge Killer that isn't weak to Sucker Punch, and the ability to read very carefully, and not taking it and have good knowledge of what your opponent's team composition is. Because certain Cinderace sets work on certain team archetypes. Because bulkier teams might like Court Change more, while more offensive-based teams might like Bulk Up or Choice sets more. Or Heavy Duty. Yeah, just Choice sets, actually. But yeah, Cinderace is definitely not one of the... Cinderace is definitely one of the most threatening Pokemon in the metagame, period. And definitely one of the most scary Pokemon on fire. Next up we got Flying. So Flying is definitely going to be Corviknight, because Corviknight on its own can just sweep entire teams that are just not prepared for it whatsoever. We already talked about this in the most obnoxious Pokemon tier list, but Taunt plus Bulk Up and whatever moves you want in between just makes this Pokemon extremely, extremely potent. Mirror Armor isn't necessarily as good on Flying, but on Steel it makes it incredibly annoying, especially for Mystical Fire users like Indeedee and Heteran. But yeah, this thing is incredibly annoying, and for the same reasons it's annoying, it's also one of the most potent Pokemon in the entire metagame. I mentioned this before, but it also was considered to be ban-worthy by a lot of the community. And by the community, I mean the monotype room. A lot of competitive players that actually play the game don't really necessarily think that it is ban-worthy, but Corviknight is definitely a contentious Pokemon that is extremely threatening, and it's clearly obvious why. It's very fat, it can bulk up, it can stop hazing and phasing. It's essentially Hatterene but on steroids, and is also Flying Steel type. And also doesn't have access to Magic Bounce, which keeps it a little easier to beat because it's restricted to 2 offensive moves. But then again, so is Hatterene, and yeah, Corviknight is just a really dangerous Pokemon. To check this Pokemon, you need a very strong special or physical attacker, and you need to stop it from doing its shenanigans beforehand before it gets out of control. Good play and proper team building will help you beat this mon 100% of the time. Every single type has a way to deal with this Pokemon, but you just have to play properly, and you have to not get extremely reckless around this mon. But it is beatable, especially on Flying. Alright, next up we have Ghost. Ghost probably going to be Dragapult and Aegislash. We already talked about Dragapult, so I'll focus on Aegislash right now, because Dragapult basically does the same thing on Ghost that it does on Dragon. But Aegislash, obviously, it was banned last generation for a reason. It was extremely fat, and it could run a multitude of sets. It could be sub-toxic, it could be Spec Shadow Ball, it could be banned, it could be a setup set with weakness policy. This Pokemon is extremely dangerous, and I feel like a lot of people still struggle to deal with this mon even to this day. Aegislash can be easily dealt with as long as you don't over-predict one certain set. As long as you make sure, and it's very easy to figure out what kind of set Aegislash is once they unleash their form, because if they release a Shadow Ball, based on the damage you can figure out whether or not it's Specs or not. So basically proper observation and proper play allows you to beat Aegislash really easily. But aside from that, Aegislash is obviously still scary because of the multitude of sets it can run, because it's so fat, because it can just run. It's really its unpredictability and the amount of sets it has that makes it really scary on Ghost. And for that reason, Aegislash is definitely one of the scariest Pokemon on the type. Marowak Alola and Corsola Galar are definitely 2 runner-ups, but Aegislash is the scariest Pokemon on Ghost. It may not be the most necessary Pokemon, but it's definitely one of the most scariest. That isn't Dragapult. But yeah, Aegislash is one of the scariest Pokemon on Ghost, and you should always be prepared to deal with it. Next type we have is Grass. Grass's most threatening offensive mon is a tie between Venusaur in the Sun and Rillaboom. So Rillaboom is obviously scary because Grassy Glide and Grassy Terrain is a really dangerous combo, and it also has access to high horsepower and fighting stab. And for those of you who don't know why I'm choosing high horsepower instead of Earthquake, you would think, oh, Earthquake, oh, all ground moves are weakened in the grassy terrain, right? That isn't true. So, fun fact, and we're gonna divert the video a little bit for this, but let me go here. Grassy terrain. So if you look up the description of the move Grassy Terrain, it says that the terrain becomes grassy terrain during the effect of power of grass types attacks used by grounded Pokemon. We already know all this, but the power of Bulldoze, Earthquake, and Magnitude used against grounded Pokemon is multiplied by 0.5. So you notice that it's only Bulldoze, Earthquake, and Magnitude. It doesn't say High Horsepower or Stomping Tantrum are affected by this, which means that they have their normal base power even in grassy terrain. So just a little fun fact for you to know. But yes, Rillaboom can run high horsepower over Earthquake and essentially get the same result. But yeah, aside from that, Rillaboom is still extremely dangerous, and Venusaur is obviously still dangerous too because of growth in the sun. Not Growl, no, not that. Growth, Weather Ball, Giga Drain, and Sludge Bomb is obviously extremely good coverage. But yeah, this is extremely good coverage. It allows Venusaur to be extremely dangerous against a lot of types. It can just outright sweep some types, like Steel, for example. There's nothing Steel can do to stop Venusaur in the sun, unless they play carefully. Same thing with Rillaboom. Water has to play really carefully around Rillaboom, especially if it gets the Swords Dance up once grassy terrain is up. But yeah, Rillaboom definitely a big threat for against most teams that just are weak to grass in general. And Venusaur is obviously a huge threat to basically the entire metagame, especially if they don't have like a resist or any particular way to deal with one of Venusaur's stab moves. But yeah, these two Pokemon are incredibly dangerous on their own, and you should always account for them when trying to prep for grass. Next up, we have ground, and I think it's pretty obvious which Pokemon we're going to do for ground, but it is going to be Excadrill. Excadrill in the sand. We're not using Choice Band anymore, we're using leftovers with Rapid Spin, Swords Dance, Earthquake, not Earth Power, but you get what I mean. Earthquake and God, I cannot type. Earthquake and Iron Head. So this set is obviously incredibly dangerous in the sand because not only can you either boost up your speed and also get rid of hazards, but you can also Swords Dance to deal with Sucker Punch users, and you can also just use your powerful stat moves, which off of a 135 attack stat is incredibly strong. And for these reasons, Excadrill is incredibly threatening against a lot of types. It is definitely one of the biggest threats that ground has to offer, aside from Diggersby and other offensive Pokemon. But this is definitely the scariest thing ground has to offer, and it can definitely outright sweep teams if you are not careful. Dealing with this thing is rather easy though, because Excadrill is a pretty frail mon, so if you have a good priority user, like Azumarill for example, you can just take care of this thing really easily. Also, certain walls can take care of this thing rather easily too. Flying Steel types, for example, Steel types in general have a decent time against him. You can also use a Fighting type to offensively check this thing, because it's not super strong on its own without a boosting item. In the sand, it's still strong, but it's not super strong. You can still like take it out with like Keldeo if it has no boosts. But yeah, Excadrill is definitely one of the scariest things ground has to offer, and you should definitely make sure you have a check for this. Next type we have is Ice. Ice is definitely Galarian Darmanitan. Gorilla Tactics, Choice Band, Choice Scarf, Choice Band, doesn't really matter. This Pokemon is busted. So strong that it got banned from OU, but it won't get banned from Mono because Ice isn't super ridiculous with team support. But yeah, Icicle Crash, U-Turn, Flare Blitz, it just has all sorts of coverage and it's all sorts of powerful too. Look at that 140 base attack stat, that is ridiculous. Paired with this ability, it's just ridiculously strong revenge killer, and absolutely one of the scariest mons Ice has to offer. Alola Tails is also an honorable mention, as well as Weavile, but Galarian Darmanitan is the Pokemon you have to worry about when you're dealing with Ice, because if you don't have something, because you can just pick it off for priority. It's pretty easy to beat it out with priority, because it is incredibly frail. It might have high HP, but those defenses are paper thin. So don't take this thing for granted and think it's gonna tank like a Mach Punch or like a Bullet Punch from like Scizor. It's still gonna die, but you have to be incredibly careful to make sure you don't let this thing do too much against your team, because this thing can just spam Icicle Crash and just do a ton of damage. But yeah, if you play carefully and if you read its moves properly, you can beat Galarian Darmanitan really easily, because it is wallable due to the fact that it doesn't have stab on all of its coverage moves, and it only has it on ice, which is easy to wall in particular, but you have to be careful with its coverage moves, because those things do hit ridiculously hard because of its ability. So yeah, definitely the scariest mon Ice has to offer. Please make sure you don't let this thing destroy your team. Next type we have is Normal. Normal's most threatening Pokemon is definitely a tie between Indeedee, male, and probably either Snorlax or Bewear. Snorlax and Bewear less so, but Indeedee is the biggest threat that Normal has to offer. And that's mainly because Expanding Force, Choice Scarf is really strong in this metagame. It sweeps a lot of types that don't have a Psychic Resist, and most types should have a Psychic Resist, but if they don't, Indeedee just takes full force advantage of that, and it can also use Dazzling Gleam to deal with opposing dark types that might try to come in and wall it, or use Mystical Fire to deal with incoming steel types that might try to wall its Expanding Force as well. This thing just has incredible coverage. It's not super strong, and that's its one flaw, is that it doesn't really sweep everything right away, but then again, if it did, it would be absolutely broken. So use this to your advantage. It's not a super strong special attacker, but it's definitely carried by Expanding Force. So just keep that to your knowledge and use one of your walls to deal with this thing. But try not to get too risky, because this thing does have access to Trick, and it can be really, for lack of a better term, tricky to deal with when you're trying to put your wall in to deal with it. But yes, Indeedee is definitely the scariest Pokemon Normal has to offer, especially since it has support from Chansey and Porygon 2 to get teleported in for free. Snorlax and Bewear aren't super scary. Snorlax, obviously, you can just curse, rest, set up, all that fun stuff, and can also just do it really blatantly. Very scary setup sweeper. And same thing with Bewear, it can just absolutely wall certain types like Dark and Steel, and just like completely destroy them with Drain Punch, Substitute, Bulk Up. Yeah, these two Pokemon are definitely very scary, but Indeedee is what really takes the cake. So always be prepared for Indeedee. It's very easy to deal with, but you have to account for it properly. Next type we have is Poison. Poison's most threatening Pokemon, and I mean offensively threatening, not like defensively threatening, because that obviously go to Toxapex. But I'd say offensively, the most threatening Pokemon on Poison would probably go to... I was thinking Gengar at first, but I think I'm gonna have to go with Salazzle. So Salazzle is the most threatening Pokemon. Yeah, I think this is a good decision, because Salazzle has Corrosion Toxic, which, if you don't know what Corrosion does, it badly poisons any type regardless of their typing. So Steel types and Poison types can't come in on its Toxic, they'll get Toxic anyway. And this is incredible for balance against Bounce, because Bounce teams tend to rely heavily on using their immunities to Toxic to absorb that, and without that comfort, Salazzle could just break down Balance teams really easily on its own, especially paired with your defensive core with your choice of Grass, Poison type, and Toxapex, along with Galarian Weezing. You just have a really solid way to just wear down your opponent and to constantly keep them guessing as to what they need to do next. But yeah, Toxic with Substitute and Black Sludge allows this thing to be a really potent threat against most types. Steel in particular, it just completely destroys Steel because of its access to Flamethrower, and Toxic just wears down every single wall that Steel has to offer. And it's because of those reasons that Salazzle is super dangerous against Steel, and also just super dangerous in general because it just has a lot of potency against balanced teams. Against offense, it's not super good because of, well, against most offensive teams, it's definitely it's still fast. It's a fast Pokemon, but it gets outrun by like Weather Sweepers and Choice Scarfers alike, so it's not meant to sweep, but it's definitely meant to cripple and weaken. That is its most effective trait. But yeah, Salazzle is able to do that. And it's definitely one of the most scary Pokemon that Poison has to offer right now. Gengar would also be a close second, but I feel like Salazzle is definitely the scariest Pokemon you have to worry about. And dealing with this thing isn't easy, because you do have to just kind of take the L and just get Toxic. If you have a Natural Cure user, obviously send them in. Like if you have Celebi or Chansey, for example, just send them in on it. But even that's a little bit hard, because Salazzle can Flamethrower Celebi and do a lot of damage, or it can just substitute up and constantly wear you down with Protect and spam that. It's just generally not a fun situation to see this mon when you're a balanced team. Offensively, it's very easy to deal with. You can just run it over with any of your Rain Sweepers, but just do know that its Toxic will never miss, and it's very hard to stop it, because there's not a lot of fast taunters in the game that can deal with it. But yeah, this Pokemon is definitely one of the most annoying and definitely one of the hardest to deal with. Not ban-worthy by any means, but very incredibly hard to deal with. Most threatening Pokemon on Psychic. Honestly, everything on Psychic is a threat. Like, mainly because of Indeedee. Indeedee just makes everything a threat thanks to Psychic Terrain, because basically, you take a type that already had pretty good traits and pretty decent Pokemon, and now you give it a terrain that basically boosts its stab immediately. So now you got Pokemon like Alakazam that can just use Expanding Force all the time with its 135 special attack stat. You got that. It can also boost this with a... Probably not going to be using this because most of them are going to be using Sash Counter, but it can also use Life Orb if it wanted to, and further boost its Expanding Force with Magic Guard, not allowing it to take a Life Orb chip. You got Pokemon like Celebi that can also take advantage of this, because every single Psychic Pokemon essentially got access to Expanding Force. You also got Gardevoir, who can take advantage of this. Not Gengar, Gardevoir. Yes, Gardevoir can also take advantage of this. Just a bunch of Pokemon are simply enabled by this behavior. Mew also as well takes advantage of this as well. And Mew also has access to Nasty Plot and things like that, so in general, Indeedee is the reason why Psychic just becomes so strong, and it's the reason why it's one of the best types in the metagame right now. If the team doesn't have Indeedee, it might still do work, because Psychic on its own, as I said, is pretty good, but Indeedee just takes it way over the top, and it allows it to just become one of the most dangerous types in the metagame. And that is an incredible trait for such a rather mediocre Pokemon on its own right. But yeah, Indeedee, definitely one of the better Pokemon in the metagame. And one of the reasons why Psychic is extremely dangerous, because it enables threats like Alakazam, Mew, Celebi, all of them to be extremely dangerous. And for that reason, I believe it is the most threatening Pokemon on Psychic, because it enables humongous threats. On Brock, I'd say the most dangerous threat is Lycanroc. Whether or not it's Lycanroc Dusk or Lycanroc Midday form doesn't really matter, but Rock obviously did like getting these things back in the recent DLC, because Lycanroc Dusk does a ton of damage, and it also got a buffed move pool with access to Psychic Fangs, Play Rough, and Close Combat, most notably. With access to all these moves and still having Tough Claws, it basically gets a lot of pressure and excuse me, I cannot speak. Gets a lot of offensive presence, and because of this offensive presence, it can sweep. It can do a lot of damage with a Choice Band set. Lycanroc Midday, obviously, it takes advantage of Tyranitar's Sand, and it can go absolutely crazy. It's not necessarily as strong as a Lycanroc Midday. I mean, Lycanroc Dusk form. Lycanroc Dusk form is a tiny bit stronger than Lycanroc Midday form, but Tough Claws does make a big difference, especially in the calculator, especially when trying to wall break certain things, like Toxapex. But yeah, both of these guys are still pretty good on Rock. I'd say this guy is definitely better though, because Tough Claws Accelerock is extremely good. But Lycanroc Midday form is also no joke, because this thing literally outspeeds so many Pokemon. It also outspeeds, fun fact, it outspeeds Scarf Dragapult, which is one of the fastest Pokemon and revenge killers in the game. So the fact that it can outspeed that Pokemon in Sand is pretty incredible. And I feel like that's definitely very good speed control for Rock to have. And it's still relatively strong even without Tough Claws. So just have that noted. But yeah, these two Pokemon are definitely your biggest threats that you have to worry about. Thankfully, you can only have one of them on the team, otherwise Rock would actually be a usable type right now. But yeah, you only have to worry about one of these guys, and they have a terrible defensive typing in Rock, so obviously you can deal with them really easily with priority. Much akin to Darmanitan and Galar, you can also just predict which move they're going to use, and careful prediction will allow you to beat them pretty easily. But yeah, and they also have really crappy team support, so take advantage of that as well. But yeah, that's it for Rock. Both of the Lycanrocs are extremely good because of their speed and their power, and they're definitely the best Pokemon on their type respectively. Next up we have Steel. Steel is definitely going to be a tie between Corviknight and Bisharp. I'll cover Bisharp because we already covered Corviknight before, and we already talked about Scizor as well. But yeah, Bisharp, and also Scizor isn't really that used on Steel. So yeah, Bisharp has actually been relatively seeing a lot of usage recently, a lot more than it was in Sun and Moon. And the reason for that is because a lot of the threats that once played it, a lot of the Mega Evolutions, a lot of the Fighting type Mega Evolutions specifically, are now gone and don't exist. And also a lot of Fairy type Mega Evolutions don't exist as well, like Mega Altaria for example. That's really important because before it had a really tough time using its stab against Dragon, because Mega Altaria would just wall it. Well, not necessarily wall it, but you get what I mean. It basically just stopped it from spamming Sucker Punch all the time, and it basically forced it out sometimes. But now Bisharp can actually do a lot of work against a lot of types, especially normal, but it does have to worry about certain Pokemon clicking no, it has to worry about Indeedee putting up the Psychic Terrain and stopping its Sucker Punch, which is incredibly annoying. But yeah, it does appreciate, obviously it appreciates Defog still being really present in the metagame right now, and that along with Swords Dance, Life Orb / Black Glasses, Knockoff, Low Kick, Iron Head, Sucker Punch, obviously really good moves. It's still really solid Pokemon. Not really much to explain about Bisharp, it's just really scary. One of the best priority users in the game right now. And definitely a really scary, not really a balance breaker, but definitely one of the scariest checks to defog in the game right now. If you try and defog carelessly in front of a Dark team or a Steel team, this thing will definitely keep you up at night and definitely keep you on your toes, because it is extremely dangerous once it has a free +2. Also, this thing can be really annoying if you get like a really bad drop on him and he just gets boosted off of it essentially. There's a reason why you don't want this thing to get a +2. But yeah, last type we're gonna cover today is Water. We would definitely be covering Urshifu Rapid Strike if that thing was still legal, but right now it is not. So I will say right now that the most threatening Pokemon on Water is definitely Dracovish in Rain, Kingdra in Rain, and in general the strongest Pokemon on Water would be Keldeo. Now, despite Keldeo, you're probably not used to seeing Keldeo anymore yet because Urshifu Rapid Strike was rampant during the metagame. Keldeo is still one of the best Pokemon Water has to offer. It just completely eviscerates Steel, Dark all on its own. Access to Calm Mind, Stall Breaking with Taunt. It's just really, really, really strong. And I already explained most of why it's incredibly strong in winning certain matchups in the fighting one, but Keldeo is still incredibly good. Kingdra and Dracovish are extremely good in the rain as well, because Pelipper essentially enables them to spam their water moves in rain, and that is really incredible. Also, Kingdra recently got Hurricane, which basically stops grass types from coming in, and also just completely annihilates certain fighting types. Not that it really cared about fighting types in the first place, because it just spammed Draco Meteor against most of them, but yeah, it's just more consistent moves and better coverage in general. Better than Ice Beam, at least. And Hurricane, yeah, Hurricane just takes Kingdra a little bit over the top, and Dracovish is obviously incredibly strong with Choice Band and Rain. Pretty much nothing switches into this thing unless it has Water Absorb, but yeah. This thing is incredibly dangerous in Rain. Definitely one of the scariest Pokemon. Some people in the monotype room want this thing banned, but obviously every professional player sees that this thing is easy to deal with because you can just revenge kill it properly, play around it appropriately, make sure you don't allow it a free switch in at all, and offensively play around it so that you don't have to worry about it getting a free turn. But yeah, that is it. This video took a little bit longer than I would have liked, but I did explain in detail about every single Pokemon and why they're all threatening in the metagame. I hope this makes it clear to you guys what certain Pokemon are really threatening on certain types and why they're some of the most threatening on certain types. I didn't really go over defensive threats, but I feel like that's another topic for another video. And not every single Pokemon exactly has really good defensive threats. Like Electric, for example, doesn't really have any of those. So, without further ado, that will be the end of today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed. This is Namernad signing off and telling you all to have a very wonderful day.